For decades, Donald Trump's life has been dissected by cameras, journalists, and critics. His skyscrapers gleamed as symbols of wealth. His name blazed across casinos. His voice boomed through reality television. And later, his presence dominated politics. But amid all that spectacle, one group rarely had a voice: the staff, the quiet ones, the people who polished, folded, scrubbed, and vanished into the background. Now imagine this. You're a young woman in your 20s, stepping into Trump Tower not as a visitor but as a maid. Your job is to enter the spaces the world isn't supposed to see: the private quarters, the silent hallways, the aftermath of late-night meetings. You see what's left behind when the spotlight turns off. What does that do to you? What secrets do you carry? And here's the bigger question: why would someone hold back their story for 30 years only to finally break the silence at age 53? This is not a tabloid headline. This is not a campaign ad. This is one woman's account: her years inside Trump's orbit, her silence, and her decision to finally speak. Stay tuned, because today we peel back the layers of a narrative that's part biography, part cautionary tale, and part reflection on what it means to be invisible but essential. You're about to hear a story that lived in the shadows for decades until now. When public figures dominate headlines, their inner circles often become collateral in the storm. We hear from rivals, allies, lawyers, even reality television contestants, but rarely from the people who sweep the floors after the lights go out. That silence isn't accidental. Household staff exist in a fragile space, one foot in the most private corners of power, the other foot chained to the fear of losing everything if they speak. Contracts, reputations, intimidation, all play their part. For years, her story was one among thousands, forgotten, buried under layers of obedience and necessity. But why does it matter now? Because Donald Trump's legacy, whether you love him or hate him, was shaped not just by boardrooms and ballots, but also by the hidden labor that made his empire look flawless. And when one of those invisible hands finally speaks, it changes the picture. Before we unpack what she revealed, we need to understand where she came from, because her silence wasn't born in Trump Tower. It began long before that, in a childhood where being unseen was both a curse and a survival skill. She was born in the summer of 1972, in a modest neighborhood where opportunity rarely knocked. Her parents were first-generation strivers, caught between the weight of survival and the dream of something better. Her father worked construction when jobs were steady, and when they weren't, he picked up whatever he could, hauling scrap, painting fences, even cleaning out basements. Her mother stitched clothes in a small room filled with fabric scraps, a sewing machine that rattled the floorboards, and the constant hum of survival. From the start, life taught her to notice the details. She remembered sitting at the kitchen table, watching her mother carefully measure fabric, fold it twice, then cut. Her father, too, had his rituals, shining his boots with slow, precise strokes before heading out to a day job that might not pay enough to cover rent. These small habits of precision, care, and endurance would later echo in her own work. School, however, was another story. She was shy, soft-spoken, and often teased for her quiet nature. Teachers said she was present but distant, as if her mind lived elsewhere. The truth was, she was carrying more than her classmates ever knew. She'd race home to watch her younger siblings while her mother took in extra sewing shifts. By the time she was 13, she was juggling homework with household chores that left little room for childhood. Her first paid job wasn't glamorous. A neighbor asked if she could help clean their house once a week. The pay was a few crumpled bills, but it felt like a fortune. More importantly, it gave her a glimpse into another world. Their home had soft carpets, polished furniture, and walls lined with books and framed photographs from vacations she could only dream of. At 14, she began cleaning more houses in the neighborhood. She learned to work quickly, quietly, and without complaint. She noticed which clients tipped generously and which inspected every surface with a finger swipe. She learned the art of silence, that people spoke freely when they believed you were invisible. Husbands and wives argued in the next room, business calls echoed from hallways, and she understood early on that her position gave her access to truths most never heard. By her late teens, she was determined to escape the limits of her small town. She wanted more than weekly house cleaning gigs that barely covered groceries. Family friends told her about New York, a city of endless opportunity, where work was hard but plentiful. And so, with a borrowed suitcase and a bus ticket, she left home at 19. The first months were brutal. She worked nights at an office cleaning service, scrubbing desks and emptying trash bins long after executives had gone home. By day, she picked up odd jobs, babysitting, cleaning small apartments, running errands for wealthier families on the Upper East Side. The city was loud, merciless, and expensive. Rent ate up half her wages. There were nights she skipped dinner so she could send money home. But slowly she built a reputation. She was reliable. She didn't complain. She knew when to speak and when to remain silent. In a city fueled by word of mouth, that mattered. One client recommended her to another. Soon she was cleaning spaces that looked nothing like the cramped apartment she rented in Queens. She still remembered the first time she walked into a penthouse. Marble floors stretched endlessly, mirrors reflected chandeliers, and the air smelled, faintly of perfume and fresh-cut flowers. It felt like stepping onto a movie set. She polished the glass tables until her reflection shimmered back at her. She changed sheets that felt softer than anything she had ever slept on. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that wealth wasn't just money. It was a world, a culture, a rhythm of living that felt untouchable. That's when she heard about the opening. A fellow cleaner mentioned that staff were needed at Trump Tower. The job promised steady pay, consistent hours, and the prestige of working inside one of New York's most famous buildings. But there was a warning, too. It's not easy. He notices everything. And once you're in for good, or out fast. She hesitated only briefly. Steady pay was too rare to pass up. Her siblings were older now, but her parents still struggled, and she had nieces and nephews who needed school supplies. She knew that working in Trump Tower meant entering a world she'd only glimpsed from the outside. A world of glittering surfaces and hidden shadows. She didn't know it then, but her years of training, watching her mother's careful stitches, enduring her father's quiet resilience, practicing the art of silence in strangers' homes, had prepared her for this. She was ready to become what she had long been told she was, invisible but essential. That single decision would define the next 2 decades of her life. Trump Tower in the early 1990 seconds wasn't just a building, it was a stage. The pink marble atrium gleamed under spotlights, fountains gurgled theatrically, and the golden elevators felt like portals into another dimension. Tourists lined up just to take photos in the lobby. Businessmen strutted past, cell phones glued to their ears, while society pages buzzed about who had been spotted coming and going. For her, walking through those glass doors the first time was almost disorienting. The noise of the city seemed to dim the moment she stepped inside. She was led past the atrium into back hallways, where the marble gave way to plain tiles, where staff lockers lined the walls, and where the glitz of Trump Tower was stripped to its bones. This was the world she would belong to, the hidden network of cooks, maids, doormen, and maintenance crews who made the spectacle possible. Her first weeks were filled with nerves. Supervisors emphasized perfection. Beds had to be made with military corners. Surfaces had to gleam. Even the placement of towels mattered. Consistency, one manager reminded her. That's what keeps this place running. No surprises. She was paired with an older housekeeper named Marta, who had been with the building for nearly a decade. Marta moved with quiet authority, teaching her which products to use, which shortcuts to avoid, and which doors to never, ever open without permission. "The walls have ears here," Marta whispered one afternoon, "and the boss doesn't forget." Through Marta, she learned the rhythms of the job. Some days were slow, filled with routine polishing and vacuuming. Other days were a storm of activity when VIP guests arrived. Politicians, celebrities, business partners. She wasn't supposed to look directly at them, but she noticed everything. The hurried whispers, the tension in the air, the way even other staff seemed to stiffen when Trump himself walked past. The first time she saw him up close was almost surreal. He swept into the lobby with his entourage, taller than she expected, his voice booming as he gave orders. For a moment she froze, feather duster in hand, unsure if she should step aside or keep working. Marta nudged her gently. "Keep your head down. Eyes on the job." She did. Over time she advanced. Her reliability earned her more sensitive assignments. Instead of public areas, she began tending to private spaces, guest suites, executive offices, eventually even the residential floors. That transition was both a privilege and a beamertuity. Test. Few staff were trusted there. Mistakes weren't just mistakes, they were breaches of trust. She remembered polishing a desk one evening and noticing a stack of papers, notes scrawled in thick black marker. She never read them, but she recognized the tone, decisive, blunt, commanding. She remembered arranging clothes in a closet, suits lined in neat rows, ties color-coded. Every detail reflected control, presentation, and a desire for perfection. Trump himself was unpredictable. Some days he passed without acknowledging the staff, as if they were shadows. Other days he flashed sudden charm, tossing off compliments about how polished the building looked. "You do good work," he said once in passing, not stopping to hear her response. For her, it was both validation and warning, he noticed. Among staff, stories circulated quietly. One doorman said he'd been reprimanded for not opening a door quickly enough. A chef described frantic rushes to prepare meals when last-minute guests arrived. Another maid whispered about sudden firings, people dismissed without explanation. The message was clear. Longevity depended not just on competence, but on absolute discretion. She adapted. She moved like a ghost, present but unseen. She made beds without leaving a crease, wiped surfaces until they gleamed, and learned to predict needs before they were spoken. Staff who lasted, she noticed, weren't necessarily the fastest or the strongest, they were the quietest. And yet, in the shadows, small alliances formed. Marta became more than a mentor. She was a confidant. Together they shared weary laughs in the break room, traded stories of aching feet, and whispered reminders to each other. Don't get noticed. There was solidarity in survival. Years rolled into decades. Trump's profile shifted from real estate mogul to celebrity. The launch of The Apprentice brought a new wave of energy through the tower. Staff buzzed about the camera crews, the contestants, the sudden attention. She polished rooms where producers had scribbled notes, vacuumed floors, still littered with paper from long meetings. For her, it was strange to see the man she knew as a demanding boss suddenly turned into a television character, playing himself with exaggerated flair. But here's the twist. This rise didn't just elevate Trump, it deepened the pressure on everyone around him. Standards tightened, image mattered more than ever. Staff were reminded constantly that nothing, not a fingerprint on glass or a wrinkle in a bedspread, should detract from the illusion of perfection. By the mid-2000 seconds, she was no longer the nervous young maid who had first entered the tower. She was a veteran, respected quietly among staff, trusted to handle the most private spaces. She had, in her own way, carved out stability in a world where others burned out quickly. And yet, even in those moments of routine, a sense of unease lingered. Because being close to power meant carrying burdens no one talked about. She had witnessed tempers, sudden shifts in mood, and private moments that revealed cracks behind the polished exterior. She didn't speak of them then. She wouldn't dare. Silence was the rule. Silence was survival. But as Trump's orbit expanded into politics, the pressure to remain silent grew heavier. And soon, silence itself would become its own kind of prison. Here's where it gets complicated. For years, her life inside Trump Tower was a rhythm of routine. She worked her shifts, collected her paycheck, and went home to a modest apartment. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And steady, for her, meant survival. But as Donald Trump's public profile grew louder, the silence inside the tower became louder too. What she once brushed off as workplace stress began to feel like something more. A culture of fear, secrecy, and constant watchfulness. By the late 1990 seconds, Trump was clawing his way back from financial turmoil. His empire had teetered under debt, Casinos struggled, but Trump Tower remained his crown jewel. For staff, this meant one thing. Everything had to look flawless, no matter what. Supervisors tightened expectations. Flowers had to be replaced before they wilted. Carpets vacuumed twice, even if no one had walked on them. Glass polished until it seemed invisible. "We're not cleaning," Marta whispered to her once. "We're performing." It was true. Their work wasn't just service, it was stagecraft. Every polished surface reinforced the illusion of control. Every wrinkle erased was another piece of evidence hidden. And in that environment, mistakes weren't just mistakes, they were betrayals. She recalled one winter evening when a visiting guest found dust on a lamp base. The complaint made its way back, and within days, 2 staff members were gone, fired. Just like that, it was a reminder: discretion wasn't enough. Perfection was mandatory. Trump himself remained unpredictable. Some days he swept past with barely a glance. Other days, he paused, his eyes scanning everything, noticing details others missed. Once, he reportedly criticized the way a tablecloth hung unevenly in a conference room. It had been off by less than an inch. Moments like that created a ripple effect among staff. If the boss noticed, everything mattered. If everything mattered, mistakes became landmines. And if mistakes were landmines, silence was armor. She learned to shrink into the background, to walk softly, to keep her voice low. The less attention she drew, the safer she felt. Staff joked privately that they were like furniture, seen only when out of place. But silence came with its own burden. She heard things, not always directly from Trump, but from conversations she was forced to overhear while working. Deals discussed late at night, arguments carried down hallways. Staff whispered of tensions with partners, lawsuits piling up, sudden firings that left colleagues shaken. She never repeated what she heard, not even to Marta. But the knowledge lingered, like shadows she couldn't shake. It wasn't just the work that exhausted her, it was the weight of carrying secrets that weren't hers, but which she couldn't unhear. Everything changed in 2015, when Trump descended the golden escalator and announced his run for president. For the world, it was spectacle. For her, it was something else entirely. The man whose office she had dusted, whose suits she had arranged, whose papers she had carefully stacked, was now on the world stage, promising to lead the country. Suddenly, the quiet world of Trump Tower was thrust into global scrutiny. News trucks parked outside, protesters gathered near the entrance. Staff were reminded more firmly than ever to remain silent. Phones were not allowed in certain areas. Conversations were monitored. Even jokes in the break room felt dangerous. Some staff quit. The pressure was too much. But she stayed. Why? That's where the debate begins. Some insiders say she stayed silent because she was afraid. Not necessarily of Trump personally, but of the system around him. Domestic workers often rely on word of mouth for employment. A single bad reference can close doors permanently. If she spoke out, if she even hinted at dissatisfaction, her name could be blacklisted. She had seen it happen before. A colleague who complained about long hours found herself without a job, and no other employer would touch her. Another who was caught talking to a reporter vanished from the staff roster overnight. Fear wasn't paranoia, it was policy. For her, silence was insurance. She had family depending on her income. She couldn't risk it. And so she worked harder, stayed quieter, swallowed her unease, and told herself, just get through the day. Others point to a different explanation, that she stayed silent not just out of fear, but out of strategy. She understood, better than most, that discretion was her most valuable currency. The longer she lasted, the more trust she earned. The more trust she earned, the better her position became. Unlike others who cycled in and out, she endured. She became part of the furniture of Trump Tower, not noticed, but always there. She saw the private moments, the small details, the unguarded seconds that never made the news. By remaining silent, she preserved that access and the stability that came with it. But silence has a cost. As Trump's presidency unfolded, she found it harder to reconcile the man she had worked for with the man now dominating headlines. His speeches, his policies, the controversies, they made her rethink the years she had spent in the shadows. She remembered the hours bent over desks, the late nights polishing glass, the whispered instructions to say nothing, and she began to wonder, had her silence made her complicit? Had she, by staying quiet, helped protect an image that wasn't entirely real? Those questions haunted her. They didn't erase the practical reasons for staying silent, fear, strategy, survival, but they added a new weight. She told herself it wasn't her place, that she was just an employee. But deep down, the silence had begun to crack. And then, decades after she first walked into Trump Tower, at the age of 53, she broke it. It didn't happen with a bang. There was no press conference, no microphone surrounded by flashing cameras. Her silence ended the way it had lived for decades. Quietly, cautiously, almost in a whisper. At 53, she was no longer working in Trump Tower. Time had worn her body down, aching joints, tired knees from years of bending, scrubbing, and lifting. The pandemic had further reshaped her life, forcing her into part-time work while she helped care for her grandchildren. In that quiet, away from the marble walls of Fifth Avenue, she began reflecting on what those years had cost her. A journalist researching the hidden lives of domestic workers in New York first approached her. At first, she declined. "I don't want trouble," she reportedly said, but the reporter returned, gently, patiently, explaining that her story mattered, not just because of who she had worked for, but because it represented thousands of invisible workers who rarely get a voice. That was the turning point. She realized her silence had not only erased her own story, but also kept hidden the reality of so many others like her. And so, she agreed to talk. The interview wasn't a tell-all expose. She didn't hand over secret documents, didn't accuse Trump of crimes. Instead, she described atmosphere, pressure, the weight of working in a place where image mattered more than people, where perfection was demanded, and where silence was enforced. She described Trump as demanding, unpredictable, sometimes charming, sometimes terrifying. She recalled the sudden mood shifts, the way a compliment could turn into criticism in the span of minutes. She spoke about the rules: never be visible unless needed, never speak unless spoken to, and never, ever repeat what you saw or heard. But what made her testimony powerful was what she left unsaid. She refused to provide salacious anecdotes or scandalous details. She didn't describe intimate encounters or secret deals. When pressed, she drew boundaries. "Some things are not safe to say," she admitted. That silence spoke volumes. It revealed the fear still lingering, the weight of a system designed to keep staff invisible even decades later. And yet, by speaking at all, she shattered that system's hold. For the first time, someone from deep inside Trump Tower's staff had stepped into the light. The reaction was immediate. Some hailed her bravery. Advocacy groups for domestic workers cited her interview as proof of the need for stronger protections, fairer contracts, and whistleblower support. They argued her words weren't about Trump alone. They were about an industry built on invisibility. Critics, however, dismissed her. Supporters of Trump called her opportunistic, accusing her of trying to cash in on his fame. Others said her testimony was vague, lacking concrete examples. Conservative commentators brushed it off as irrelevant. "She's just a maid," one pundit scoffed. But that dismissal, ironically, underscored the very point she was making: that invisible workers are always seen as replaceable, their voices disregarded the moment they rise above silence. For her, the backlash was expected. She had spent years calculating the cost of speaking. She knew her words would divide, but she also knew the relief of no longer carrying everything alone. She told the reporter, "I don't want to be invisible anymore. I was invisible for too long." That statement echoed beyond her personal story. It tapped into a broader truth about power, that those at the top shine brightest because so many below them stay hidden in the shadows. Her reveal didn't bring down towers. It didn't change election outcomes or erase decades of controversy, but it did something subtler, perhaps more enduring. It punctured the myth of total silence. Because once one voice speaks, others begin to wonder if they can too. Breaking silence is never the end of a story. It's the beginning of a new one, and for her, the aftermath was as complicated as the years of silence that came before. At first, there was relief. She had finally spoken, finally said out loud the things she had carried alone for decades. It wasn't everything. Far from it. She had kept details vague, avoided anything that could put her in legal jeopardy, and chosen her words carefully. But even those cautious admissions felt monumental to her. It was like breathing again, she told the journalist afterward. Like I had been holding my breath for 30 years. Relief was quickly followed by anxiety. Speaking publicly, even without naming names or detailing specifics, placed her in the spotlight in ways she had never experienced. Reporters called. Producers wanted interviews. Advocacy groups asked if she would testify at forums about domestic worker rights. For someone who had spent her entire life avoiding attention, this sudden flood of interest was overwhelming. Public reaction was split, as expected. Supporters of Trump dismissed her words as irrelevant or exaggerated. Commentators on conservative talk shows mocked the idea that a maid's perspective mattered in the grand scheme of things. So what if she says it was stressful? One pundit scoffed. That's what working for a billionaire is like. But critics of Trump saw something different. To them, her words confirmed long-held suspicions about the culture surrounding him, demanding, image-obsessed, and merciless toward those beneath him. Progressive outlets praised her bravery, framing her testimony as part of a larger reckoning with how powerful men treat those who serve them. And then there was the middle ground. People who didn't see her story as political at all, but as human. It doesn't matter if you support Trump or not, one reader commented online. Her story is about the way invisible workers are treated everywhere. That's the part that matters. Her decision to speak sent ripples through the domestic work industry in New York. Advocacy organizations had long argued that maids, nannies, and housekeepers were vulnerable to exploitation, low wages, long hours, no job security, and silence enforced through fear of retaliation. Her testimony became a rallying point. Workshops and panels began highlighting her story as an example of why protections were needed. Labor activists argued that her silence wasn't unusual, it was systemic. Thousands of workers were in the same position, seeing, hearing, and experiencing more than they could ever say, trapped between the need to survive and the fear of losing everything.